We're going to go ahead and start the EAs and entrepreneurship panel. I'm Joan Gass. I'm going to be moderating today. I'm a dual degree student at the Harvard Kennedy School in Public Policy and Stanford Business School. And this panel came about because Julia Wise and I were talking about different folks that were exploring EA entrepreneurship, was interested in finding a co-founder at EA Global for education technology and mobile health stuff, and we thought it'd be great to have a panel and a track for people that were interested in thinking about EAs and entrepreneurship. So we'll have the panel now, and then if folks are interested in sticking around and having further conversations, we'll move to the atrium after this for lunch and to talk more. We're going to have a little bit of time where the panelists will answer questions, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So I'll just go ahead and say who's on the panel now, and then give them each 2 minutes to talk about kind of a brief introduction, their background, and how it relates to EA entrepreneurship. So we have on the panel Bruce Friedrich, who's the executive director of the Good Food Institute and the founding partner of New Crop Capital. We also have Sweta Junapalli, who's the founder and CEO of New Incentives. On her right, we have Spencer Greenberg, who's the founder and CEO at Sparkwave and the founder of clearthinking.org. And then on his right, we have Eric Gasfrin, the founder and CEO of Dynamic Care Health. So the first question, which we'll just pass down the panelists, is a quick introduction on your respective areas of expertise.
Hello. Excellent. Yes, I am Bruce Friedrich. I'm executive director of a nonprofit organization called the Good Food Institute. And the Good Food Institute was actually founded on EA principles. So we are an explicitly effective altruism-focused charity. Animal Charity Evaluators ranked the Good Food Institute as one of the 3 top philanthropic investments among nonprofits for people who are attempting to help animals. We work to get animals out of industrialized animal agriculture. So in terms of entrepreneurship, there are sort of 2 ways that I think about GFI and entrepreneurship. The first one is that as a nonprofit organization, we are very much a startup. So GFI is an entrepreneurial endeavor. And then the other one is that one of the program areas at GFI is supporting entrepreneurs. And we actually start companies. So in the plant-based meat and the clean meat space, alternatives to industrialized animal agriculture. Last year, our first year, we started 2 companies, a plant-based seafood company and also a plant-based meat company focused in India. So we're starting companies, we're helping entrepreneurs in this space who are focused on transforming agriculture away from industrialized animal agriculture, and GFI is an entrepreneurial endeavor.
Thanks. Hi everyone, my name is Sweta Junapalli and I'm the founder and CEO of New Incentives. New Incentives is a nonprofit that implements cash transfers for routine immunizations in Nigeria. So we work in parts of Nigeria where up to 80% of infants haven't completed their immunization schedule. What really kind of defines us as an organization is we're always committed to rigorously testing what we do, and if it doesn't work, being open to failure and closing our program. So for instance, last year we had a major strategic shift where we stopped working on a certain type of program and because it wasn't strong enough and pivoted to immunizations. So to date, we've done about 50,000 cash transfers, and later this year, we'll be starting a randomized control trial for about 130,000 infants. So it's great to see you all today, and I hope we get to meet some of you.
Hi, I'm Spencer Greenberg. I'm the founder and CEO of Sparkwave, and what we do is we try to build new companies to solve problems in the world. So we look for areas where we think software could really help, but nobody seems to have a solution in that space that we think is doing the job. And we actually will work on building the first version of that product, and then we'll recruit a CEO to spin that product out into a new company and send it on its way and try to unlock that value.
Hey guys, my name is Eric Gastfriend, and I've been involved in the EA movement for a while. I first got connected to Will McCaskill in 2011 when he was starting 80,000 Hours, and I started volunteering for them. I've also volunteered for Future of Life Institute in Boston. And then I went to Harvard Business School for my MBA, and while I was there, I started the grad student effective altruism group. And one of our main initiatives is the Philanthropy Advisory Fellowship, where we recruit and train Harvard grad students to advise philanthropists and foundations on how to have the greatest impact with their charitable dollars. So over the past 2 years since I started it, we've worked with YouTube, TripAdvisor, Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation, and the Laura and John Arnold Foundation, among others. Before business school, I was running a startup in the video game industry, building cloud gaming technology. And my current full-time role is about 1.5 years ago, I started a company called Dynamic Care Health with my father, who's an expert in addiction psychiatry. And we're building a technology platform to help people recover from substance addiction, drugs, alcohol, and tobacco, using evidence-based incentives and technological monitoring. And my embarrassing fun fact is that I'm a big fan of the Disney movie Moana.
Thanks so much, Eric, and all of the panelists. The next question that we have is, what do you think, if someone was thinking about EA entrepreneurship and if entrepreneurship was right for them, how did you guys go about answering that question? And what advice would you have for folks in the audience who might be in a similar position?
Well, I have an odd I feel very honored by the amount of time people do spend like asking me what I think they should do, which I'm not really sure why I'm good at giving that advice, but I appreciate it. And I appreciate the 80,000 Hours website, because I advocate that everybody check out the 80,000 Hours website. And one of the things that they talk about, which I think is absolutely right, is, I don't think they call it vocational fungibility, but the idea that for the vast majority of jobs, pretty much every job that's advertised online, there are going to be a lot of people who will apply for that job. And so you will be either a little bit better or a little bit less good as somebody who would otherwise fill that role. The two roles where you would be invaluable, the two things that if you do them and they are worth doing, where you will be unique, one of them is entrepreneurship, so figuring out something that needs to be done, sort of figuring out white space in the altruistic realm or white space in the business realm where you can do significant good in the world, and then launching an endeavor to do that. There are certainly an awful lot of entrepreneurial endeavors that maybe aren't worth doing, and oftentimes I think people launch entrepreneurial endeavors without doing proper due diligence. But if you find an area and you bring EA thinking to it, EA is new enough that there are a lot of altruistic things to be done where you may well have a phenomenal idea and nobody's done it yet, and you will be the only one to do that unless you do it. So I see entrepreneurship and earning to give as sort of the two things where if you don't do it, it won't get done. So like earning to give, if you take one of the roles as a lawyer or a consultant with Bain or whatever you have the capacity to do, if you have the capacity to make a lot of money, anybody else who takes that role is not going to give away half or 2/3 or however much of their salary. So that seems like a really good place to focus if it's the sort of thing that you have the demeanor for, and then entrepreneurship as well.
I think it's an interesting question because, I mean, by default, entrepreneurship is very compelling because it gives you a chance to have an outsized impact. But I think that if you look at entrepreneurship in general, there's already a very high rate of failure. And so if you look at EA values, if you're really committed to achieving those values, which are the confluence of them to meet them all is a really high bar. So I think if you're really open to failure in general, but then extra open to it and want to do some type of EA entrepreneurship endeavor, then it might make sense. New Incentives last year went through Y Combinator, and one of the kind of constant messages of Y Combinator is that you should really know your customers. And so I think that's another question when exploring an endeavor is, what kind of endeavor and to achieve success, where will you have to be? And so there's a lot of personal choices that come with that. Like if you're going to try to work on some intervention in Sierra Leone, are you willing to spend a majority of your time there for the first few years and get to know your customers? So really it depends on what part of the ecosystem you're looking to plug into, and whether, I think as Bruce said, you know something truly unique about that maybe other people don't, that gives you a value add there.
I think that entrepreneurship is a really interesting option for effective altruists, because if you think about how valuable money is to you, making $10 million has a lot of value to you personally. Making $100 million is a bit more, making $1 billion a bit more, but it's very nonlinear. Like the additional money you make has much less incremental value for you personally in terms of your happiness. A lot of studies have shown that happiness seems to be linked about logarithmically with income. But if you're thinking about helping the world, you can really help the world a great deal more with $100 million than you can with $10 million, and so on. So you can kind of get this linear increase in the good you can do. And the nature of entrepreneurship is that it's high probability of failure, but the expected value, if you're skilled and have the right personality, the expected value can be very, very high. So I think from the point of view of helping the world, it can be really appealing. But I think it's also important to note that most people don't have the right personality to run a company. And so what do I mean by that? Well, how does this following job sound to you? It's going to be incredibly stressful. You're never going to know what you're supposed to be doing. You're going to have complete uncertainty. You're probably going to fail. You're going to have obstacle after obstacle after obstacle that seem like they're going to kill your endeavor. And if you ever let any of them make you give up, then it will definitely kill your endeavor. Now, if that sounds like a really fun time for you, I definitely think you should consider EA entrepreneurship. And you actually might be able to cause a huge amount of good in the world.
Yeah, I hope that this panel inspires all of you to go into entrepreneurship. There's this concept I really like in economics called returns to education, where economists estimate that for every additional year of schooling that someone has, they'll be able to earn roughly an additional 10% in their salary on the job market. And of course, that's like a very broad kind of metric. You can imagine that it would depend a lot on what kind of career someone goes into. So if you're going to be a professional athlete, the returns to education are probably really low. But if you're going to go into academia or management, then the returns to education are probably much higher. And in addition to returns to education, you could think about returns to other things, like what are the returns to IQ or intelligence? What are the returns to EQ or emotional intelligence? What are the returns to having more connections or a better work ethic or more charisma, more rationality? And you can imagine that in different career paths that these numbers would look very different. And one concept that I think is really important for entrepreneurs is what I call gutsiness. Which is kind of, I think, what Spencer was alluding to also a bit, that you just have to really be willing to go for it and not get discouraged and take big leaps of faith and really put yourself out there as an entrepreneur. So I think entrepreneurship is something where you have returns to education, IQ, rationality, charisma, all these things. But I think actually the most important one from what I've seen in successful entrepreneurs is the returns to gutsiness. The gutsiest entrepreneurs seem to be the ones who are the most successful. So I think if you see yourself as someone who really has like a lot of drive and energy to accomplish your goals, then that's probably a good indicator for entrepreneurship.
So now that Spencer has convinced everyone in the audience to be an EA entrepreneur.
Let me just mention that speech has never convinced anyone I've talked to who want to be an entrepreneur not to be. They always somehow seem totally unfazed by that. So.
Okay, well, filter test. So now, if people are thinking about being an entrepreneur, I'm curious for each of you, did you think about when you're an entrepreneur, the motivation of pursuing profit or pursuing direct impact, doing both in your organization? And if it was direct impact, how did you decide where in the white space to focus on?
Sure. So I spent around 2 years looking for startup ideas, trying to decide what I wanted to spend my time on. I knew I wanted to start a company, but I didn't have the perfect idea yet. And as I looked around at ideas, at first I was focused more on earning to give, trying to find something that would just make a lot of money. But as I looked into it, I realized that there are some really good ideas out there that could make a lot of money and also have really positive social impact. And that's what led me to do Dynamic Care Health, where it's a for-profit company, but trying to solve a major social problem of addiction. So I would encourage people to try to focus on either social enterprise, where you have like a dual goal of social impact and money, or just straight like nonprofit, pure social impact. And part of the reason for that also is I think right now there's a lot more money flowing around in the EA community. So at the moment, it's less of a constraint on getting problems solved. So my advice would be to find a problem that you really want to solve, that's important from an EA perspective, and then try to figure out what's the right intervention to solve it. And then with that intervention, is there a way you can make it work as a for-profit, or does it only make sense as a nonprofit, and choose the model that fits best?
I would definitely second what Eric said. I think that a lot of people in entrepreneurship jump too quickly at the first idea they think of that they're excited about. It's relatively easy generating ideas. The hard thing is finding good ideas, and so I really advocate trying to come up with a lot of different ideas and waiting till you find ones that seem like not only do they seem really good from a business standpoint, but they also seem good from helping the world standpoint, because really the ideal is finding something that is in the intersection of both of those. And if you wait longer and if you put in the time to really think about it and talk to a lot of people, you might be able to come up with one of those. And why would you start one that's just optimizing for profit if you could find something that seems equally good from a profit perspective, but also is trying to benefit the world? And part of the reason I come to this perspective is that I think a lot of people have a kind of naive view that if you're selling a product and people are buying it, then you must be helping them. This is absolutely false. There's I have a list of 13 different ways that this is false, but I'll just to give you a taste of a couple of them. Imagine a company is really good at marketing, but they don't have a very good product. And they're out-competing a company with a better product that's less good at marketing. So when they're selling that product, they're actually causing customers to buy a less good product instead of a more good competitive product. Or another example, there's plenty of supplement companies that sell supplements that literally do nothing. And the reason that they're able to keep selling them indefinitely is because the claims they make are not things you can immediately witness. Like if the supplement says that they improve your heart health, well, how do you know if your health is improved? You don't know, so you keep buying it. So I would just advocate really thinking about looking for a product idea that actually there's a strong reason to think that you're adding real value in the world. And there's this really happy coincidence that if you're doing something that actually matters, it's a lot easier to get other people excited about the idea. It's easier to recruit people willing to take a salary cut because they're so excited to work with you. People just want to be on board with what you're doing. People want to introduce you to people. You're more inspired yourself. I mean, when you're pursuing just money, it's just much less personally inspiring. It's easier to give up. So I think there are a lot of reasons to try to do something that really adds value to the world.
Yeah, I agree. I think the business model, or like what you do, or if for-profit, nonprofit, is secondary. But when you look at kind of nonprofits in general, people underestimate the role of the business model. So if you're interested in kind of a direct impact nonprofit form of organization, that doesn't mean that you're going to scale less than a for-profit or not be able to attract the capital. It really just matters what is the business model of your nonprofit. So it's really interesting with EA because if you look at evidence and cost effectiveness and that defines your organization, well then you're going to have a lot of buyers if you can really prove those aspects of your organization. In general, though, I think I never wanted to be an entrepreneur, and so the first thing I did when I had an idea is I went and shopped it around to like 50 organizations, just asking if they would take it on. And I think doing that kind of helps you understand, well, usually the idea you have is not unique, and people have tried it before, and so figuring out, well, have people tried it, to what extent have they failed, and why have they failed, will help you figure out, well, is there really a viable pathway to doing that?
Yeah, the origin story of the Good Food Institute is based in effective altruism. And a couple of years ago, some of the top leadership at Mercy for Animals, which is an animal protection organization, were discussing, they were sort of looking at what companies like Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods and Hampton Creek were doing in terms of removing animals from industrialized animal agriculture by creating products that actually compete on the basis of the factors that dictate consumer choice. And they thought, these companies, they are for-profit, they are startups, and these companies are doing exactly what anybody in the environmental community or the global health community or the animal protection community, anybody who is focused on decreasing the number of animals in industrialized animal agriculture, that's their focus. And these are for-profit companies. These are entrepreneurs who are having basically the same impact, well, and really even a stronger impact, because pretty much everybody, when they're thinking about what to eat, thinks about taste, price, and convenience. And so they're making products that compete on the basis of taste, price, and convenience. So that was sort of the central brainstorm of GFI. And so at GFI, we have a bunch of programs that are all focused on helping these, creating new startups and helping the startups that exist to succeed. So we're sort of both the nonprofit and the for-profit. We're a nonprofit that helps the for-profits. So I was recruited by people at Mercy for Animals to launch GFI, and we obviously did due diligence. We thought about whether it should be incorporated into Mercy for Animals or should be a separate charity. Do we really need a new charity? And we spent a lot of time thinking about that and decided that it hadn't been tried. It was worth trying. There were a lot of areas that are mission-oriented and fit into the 501c3 nonprofit model. And we spent a lot of time thinking about, what is maximum impact, and decided that it made a lot of sense to launch the organization. And then one of the things that we do inside of the organization is look for white space companies in the plant-based meat and the clean meat market sectors, other companies that can be the next Beyond Meat or the next Hampton Creek or the next Impossible Foods. And if anybody in the audience wants to do very, very well, earn to give by starting one of these companies, and you have the demeanor that Spencer just shouted out, I think that's absolutely right for what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur. If you think that's you and you want to both have a massive positive social impact within the for-profit world, I'd be delighted to chat with you about some of the ideas that we have.
I'm going to give the speakers a little bit of time at the end just to talk about any things that they're on the lookout for in terms of people they want to connect with or things that are going on within their ventures. But before we turn to that, why don't we take a couple of minutes for audience Q&A? So if anyone has a question, a little bit difficult to see. If not, I have more. Okay, right here.
Just off the cuff, you mentioned white space companies. It's the term I haven't heard of before. Can you please elaborate on that a bit more and how we can identify them?
Sure. So, whether it's a white space company or a white space nonprofit, the idea of a white space company is just something that's not happening. So, in the nonprofit realm, there are probably limitless numbers of white space companies that would apply EA principles to problems that exist in the world. One of those is the Good Food Institute. There was not a nonprofit organization that was focused on harnessing markets and food technology to try to disrupt or transform animal agriculture, and so we decided to start one. Similarly, there's not presently a company that's focused on creating plant-based chicken nuggets for schools, and we think that's something that would make a lot of sense. There are a lot of different companies, ideas that we have for companies in the clean meat space where nobody is doing them yet, and we think they would have tremendous potential. So white space just means there's something that should be happening there, but it's white. There's nothing filled in yet.
Cool.
Hi, I was just wondering, how do you go about finding the white space that you should spend your time working on?
This is something that I think Eric and Spencer and Sveta all talked about. And whether it's a for-profit company or a not-for-profit company, making sure that applying the concepts of effective altruism, is this I would basically just take the effective altruism. Is it neglected? So is it something that doesn't have resources now? I guess if it's a white space company, by definition, it's neglected. Is it high impact? Do you have the capacity to do it? I think one of the things that Spencer said was that people oftentimes sort of jump at the first idea that they have, but really spend a lot of time figuring out what issue is most important to you, spend a lot of time figuring out if your idea has already been tried, think about lots and lots of ideas, have conversations with very smart people in the EA community to determine whether it really is a good use of your resources and is the best thing to be doing, and probably do a lot of self-analysis about whether you really have the capacity to be an entrepreneur, the things that Spencer was talking about. And if the answer to all of those questions are yes, jump in and go for it with everything that you've got.
I definitely would agree with that. I would also add that I'm aware of 5 different strategies people use to come up with innovative ideas that people haven't done before, and I have slides on this if you want to check them out on my website. But just to give you a very quick overview, so one thing that people do is they think about 2 different areas that they have a lot of knowledge about that are not particularly related to each other, and then they look at the intersection of those 2 areas and say, is there any idea here that I'm like uniquely capable of doing because I know about both X and Y, and very few people know that intersection of skills. Another thing that people do is they use a kind of lean startup methodology where they look for things that they're close to in their life, like problems that they can see, and to try to pursue those. A third thing people do is they look for new technologies that are coming on the marketplace, and they say, what do these technologies enable that wasn't previously possible? And then by getting to learn those technologies really well and then looking a little bit ahead, they're actually able to pick up on ideas that nobody has identified yet. So there's just 3 of them.
Yeah, I agree with everything that they said. I thought it might be helpful to just like paint a picture of how I came up with the idea and decided to work on dynamic care health. Like Spencer mentioned, one way is to look at the intersection of 2 different fields. So my dad's an expert in addiction psychiatry. My background is in business and technology. And we realized that there's this intervention of using financial incentives that is shown to be really effective in helping patients recover. I realized that with smartphones, you could actually automate the entire methodology, which hadn't been done before. And as Bruce mentioned, the EA criteria for selecting a cause is you want it to be big, neglected, and tractable. This is something that 80,000 Hours writes about a lot. So in our case, addiction is a huge problem, and it affects 40 million Americans. It's very neglected in terms of the amount of resources we spend on it compared to other health problems, and especially our particular intervention of financial incentives. No one else was doing it. And we knew it was tractable because we had this intervention that we know works, and we had connections in the field. Once you've picked a cause, then next you want to pick your intervention. And you want to look at the scientific literature to find out what types of interventions have the most evidence behind them. In our case, this financial incentive intervention has over 40 randomized controlled trials and 6 meta-analyses behind it. And so once you've found an effective intervention that you think will have a good business model or nonprofit model to back it up, then you want to do an impact estimation using counterfactual adjustment. So trying to think about, if the company or nonprofit is successful, how many people will you reach? But not just how many will you reach, also what percentage of them will actually have like a better outcome compared to if your startup didn't exist. So that's kind of like an effective altruism framework for thinking about how to pick a startup idea or whether to go forward with a startup idea.
And the 80,000 Hours website lays all that out, I think, really, really nicely. And I think the one thing that all of us are saying is really bring due diligence and don't just sort of jump at the first thing, and do make sure that you have the temperament for the level of chaos and uncertainty and diligence that's going to be required.
Hi? Okay, cool. So one of the things I'm wondering is that as like a privileged white person in like, I don't know, Berlin in my case, I'm probably not going to bump into like the really crucial problems. So if I just go with the methodology of like, what am I good at? What are the things that I'm seeing? Can I combine this? Like, I sort of expected not to be the most high value thing I could do. Like one of the ideas I had was like, okay, go into a third world country, right? And like look at all the problems there and see whether I can make a fit there. What would other ideas in that direction be? Like, how can I find the real problems that will be better than what is in my immediate circles?
Well, I'll just respond to that because that's a great segue into my favorite method for coming up with new ideas, which is that you look for some absurdly large problem that just clearly continues to exist and has existed for a long time, and then you just do a ton of research to understand why 100 people have tried to solve it and have all failed. And so you can, there are so many problems in the world, and you can kind of take your pick. Like, pick one, start trying to understand why has everyone who tried to solve this failed. And sometimes you'll say, yeah, that's just not really solvable right now, or this would be way beyond the scope of something I could work on. Or you might say, hey, you know what? There might be things that people haven't tried. They're not necessarily going to succeed, but actually they seem plausible, and it doesn't seem like anyone has used them. So that's one way to approach it.
I think it's not a coincidence that all the EA entrepreneurs on this panel, including Joan actually, are doing startups based on translating science into action. So I explained a bit the science behind my startup. Spencer has Clearer Thinking and Uplift, which are both based on psychology research. Sweta's startup is based on the economic science behind conditional cash transfers. Bruce's science is based on work done on cultured meat and clean meat at labs like Mark Post, and others. It was an academic endeavor before it was a startup. And Joan also has worked on educational interventions that have been studied by the Poverty Action Lab at MIT. So I think EA entrepreneurs kind of have a comparative advantage in doing these kind of translational science startups, and that can be a good way to find ideas where it's not based on, like, you know, what you're personally experiencing or what you run into on a day-to-day basis.
And I just want to underline one thing that I think multiple people have sort of nodded at, and that is that there are these colossal problems, and the idea of applying EA principles and scientific principles to these problems is fairly new. So people have been, if you read Will McCaskill's book or any of the other books on effective altruism, one of the things that you learn is the degree to which people just keep doing the same thing that's not working and expecting that eventually it will work. So by being a part of the EA movement and bringing this sort of rigorous thought process to some of these problems, there probably are a lot of ideas that nobody has come up with yet. And if you apply, you know, Spencer's model, you may well come up with something fantastic. I do just want to say I don't think it needs to be something that you're right now passionate about. And I don't think it even necessarily, like, I don't think you need, if you have the temperament that Spencer laid out, I don't think you need to be like a scientist working on science or a data expert working on data or whatever. If you have the temperament and the diligence and the intelligence to be an entrepreneur, there are a lot of different places that you can bring that passion.
And just one resource to point out, GiveWell, I think Josh Rosenberg in particular has been doing research on high impact, evidence-based ideas they would like to see turn into charities. And then Charity Science has a fellowship and has shortlisted opportunities for people looking at EA entrepreneurship. So just wanted to highlight those two resources as potential areas to start with. In the last couple seconds that we have, a little bit that we have, I know this year's theme is about community and being stronger together. So for each of the panelists, what are ways that people in the audience could be on the lookout to help you in your EA endeavors?
Well, so right now we're looking to scale up to about 650,000 cash transfers in the next 2 years. And where we really see a lot of problems is how to scale our data systems. So if anybody has a lot of expertise in database consulting or is a data scientist, we'd love to talk to you.
Thanks. So we found it extremely useful in the AA community looking for CEOs for our products. So the different kinds of products we build stuff in mental health, like for depression and anxiety. We have stuff we work on for learning, decision making. We design new programming languages. We do a lot of different things. And so if you're the sort of person you think you're really excited about doing a startup, but you don't know what idea to work on, you know, come talk to me, get in touch with me, and we can talk about whether there might be a good fit with you.
In our case at Dynamic Care Health, we're always looking for intros to investors who are interested in digital health. Also, we're looking to hire an Android developer who has a few years of experience. And then with the Philanthropy Advisory Fellowship, if you know of any foundations that would like free advice from Harvard grad students, those intros are really helpful to me as well.
Yeah, and like Spencer, the Good Food Institute is looking for CEOs that are interested in taking some of our white space companies and running with them. So if you'd like to chat about that, I would be delighted. We also at GFI have a bunch of job openings, including a research analyst, which I've talked to a couple people just in the last few hours who are interested in that job. But we have a bunch of other jobs as well at just gfi.org/jobs.
So just a reminder, there's going to be more time to talk to folks. You can come up here since we're going to end our panel, or in a couple of minutes we'll move to all have lunch together in the atrium. So thank you guys very much for coming, and thank you very much to our panelists.